Hi, I'm Victor Vogel, author and speaker and consultant, and author of Creating a Bad Guy Free Zone While You Travel and Creating a Bad Guy Free Zone, How the Average Citizen Can Protect Themselves. Today we're going to be discussing protests and the violence that's associated with protests. And let me begin with a disclaimer saying that everything I present in these blogs really are my thoughts and my opinions based on what I see, what I've lived through over the years, and my background in the areas that I've worked. I also want to say that nothing can guarantee 100% that you will not be attacked or caught in the middle of a terrorist activity. So what's presented can only be helpful from the standpoint that it is much better to have a plan and the knowledge about what to do in these types of situations than to have nothing at all. So, having said that, let's talk about what's going on with protests and why do people get so excited about them? Well, what I think would have happened is pretty simple. I think the statues would have come down. I think the city had pretty much decided that this needed to happen in light of the activity that had been going on in the country, and that is something protests do. Nonviolent protests are a way of communicating to public officials what people desire. It's when you have conflicting points of view that violence begins to come into play. But the fact is, there are a lot of ways you can do that without protesting. And which basically says protests are not very effective at getting things done. In the end, government officials are going to act on what they think is the right thing to do based on the law and what they need to have to protect the community and to promote the community's best interest. So protesting, as I've seen throughout the years, really hasn't had that much effect on making changes in law. It has created awareness, and I think that's important to understand that it's a fast way for public officials to become aware of what the public likes or dislikes about what they're doing. But you can do that in a lot of different ways than protest. Let's start with a thought. Just suppose, no one showed up to demonstrate against taking the Confederate statues down that the city council had decided to do. And let's also suppose no anti-protesters showed up to protest against the protesters. What do you think would have happened in Charlottesville? Here's what I think would have happened had nobody arrived to protest, or even if the anti-protesters hadn't arrived. I believe we'd have 3 more lives in the world today, and 3 less families grieving. I think we wouldn't have a whole bunch of people in the hospital taken away from their jobs and injured and having to cope with those injuries. And in the end, I believe what would have happened is the city would have done the same thing they were going to do before the protest. And that is, they would have taken the statues down. So what did the protest accomplish? First of all, if the protesters, the alt-right, far-right, neo-Nazis, fascists, whatever you want to call them, if that group had arrived and they had protested and walked the streets and yelled and chanted all they wanted to chant, and no anti-protesters would have shown up, their protest would have been hollow. They would have basically, frankly, looked like idiots. They were stating things that are contrary to our country's belief. Everybody understands that. There's far more of us than there are of them. They thrive on violence. They thrive on hatred. And when an anti-protest group comes out, we play right into their hands. They get media coverage. It gives the opportunity for their side and the supporters of that side to make accusations about the other side being just as violent and just as criminal in their acts. So, in the long run, protest in this scenario did not deliver anything different than what the community was about to do anyway. But it did leave a lot of violence. It did leave 3 people dead and a lot of people grieving. And it uprooted this society once again, dividing us severely. One of the things most misrepresented in protest, and I think this is on both sides, whether, for example, it was the fascists or the anti-protesters against fascism, they both tend to put some sense of religion into this process, and you have to think about this a little bit. The fact is, it's just wrong. A lot of people cite the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, the right of happiness and the pursuit of liberty, the protection of their home. You know, this simply isn't true. It's not found anywhere in the Bible. God did not endow people with these things. I mean, I've looked consistently trying to understand this. The principles are sound, don't get me wrong. I mean, people should have, in a free society, should have happiness, should have peace, should have liberty to do what they need to do. They should have protection and be secure. All those things that our founding fathers wanted are good things. I'm not saying that. I'm simply saying God did not endow us with those. Okay? The Bible simply doesn't say anything like that, and you would have to go to some significant lengths to find that or try to interpret passages that say that. So how do we know that? How do we know that? First of all, every person who's born has a different DNA. So some people are born with genetic defects. Other people are born without genetic defects. Some people are born into poverty. Some people are born into wealth. Some people are born into slavery, and some people aren't, depending on which country that you're born in. So the fact that we are basically genetically different means we're not equal. We're not born equal. We're not endowed with equality. Nowhere in the Bible does it state that we're endowed with rights to happiness or liberty. In fact, pretty much God paints a different picture of life on earth. Look around you, what's going on in the world. And if you look at the examples in the Bible, there are examples designed to teach you that you can overcome adversity if you live right. But the fact is, God didn't paint a great picture of what was going to be going on in the world. Now, I think what God did provide is a clear set of rules to live by. Like don't murder others, don't commit adultery, don't lie, honor your parents, among other commandments that he presented. And later Christ and the apostles brought other rules that provided for a more peaceful and a loving life. Not things that were endowed with us, but the principles and rules of God's plan that we're asked to abide by, like the fruit of the Spirit found in Galatians, that talks about love and sincerity and passion, compassion and warmth. He didn't endow us with any rights. This is what our leaders chose to make part of their country's values, and how they said it, I struggle with a little bit, and that in fact the premise of protest and anti-protest are at odds with what God wants us to do. You know, in Philippians 4:6, he says, never worry about anything. Instead, in every situation, let your petitions be made known to God through prayers and requests with thanksgiving. In other words, pray in a way that you know He and believe that He is truly going to deliver it to you. Then God's peace, which goes far beyond anything we can imagine, will guard your hearts and minds in union with the Messiah, Jesus. If you're a true believer, then protest and anti-protest are at odds with what God wants you to do. Actions you do take should be focused on love, peace, and goodwill towards others. That's what God wants us to believe. So if you just can't leave your concerns with God, if you're not that point in your religious life yet, then make whatever protest you do peaceful, and understand clearly you want that what you want to say and do, and hold it up against things like the fruit of the spirits in Galatians, and see if it is standing the test of whether or not you're behaving the way you should while you're protesting. And if you cannot present what you say in a way that aligns with these principles, then be prepared for the violence that you will encounter. Look, I want to see change for the better in the country. I want us to unite as one and be seen by the rest of the world as the best and most powerful country in the world. I want our country to be one that people desire to live in versus other countries. I want us to have affordable, high-quality health care. I want our taxes to be reduced to the point where we have to spend and improve our economy. I want our environment to remain clean and safe for all our children and grandchildren to come. I want people to live without fear of discrimination. I want companies and organizations to be concerned about the impact they have on our society and not just greed. We simply don't have time to spend on protests, arguments, backstabbing, and infighting. There are a lot of things we have to get done, and many are very complicated. We don't have time to spend arguing and fighting. What I have to do is become involved. What I have to identify and promote people who want to deliver what I want for our country. I have to become part of the fabric that builds the plans that deliver what I want. I have to encourage and participate in the communication plans to convince leaders in our country this is what they need to do. This is how things get changed, not protesting. This is how we become stronger and fight against ideologies that want to destroy the values of our country and what they were founded on. In summary, protests don't make the difference. People get involved with their government do make the difference. This is Vic Vogel. I'll be creating bad guy free zones, and I definitely won't be protesting.